By the time my son was 6 months old, the roller coaster life that I had lived since I got married, moved to Thurso, had a baby and 2 different jobs, seemed to be calming down. I was in a very comfortable position. Lovely baby, nice little house, and a pattern to my life which enabled me finally to pass my driving test, and also at some point in this period we moved into the brand new house that the Atomic Energy Authority provided for their employees. The departure from our little house was not without incident, because obviously we wanted to leave our affairs in order. We'd sorted out the rent, we'd paid the electricity bill, and I went to the gas board to pay the gas bill. I was met by a terribly efficient, perhaps even officious, assistant who said, "Oh, they did not provide gas to number 10 Sinclair Street." I lived in number 10 Sinclair Street. I'd had a new baby while living there. We had cooked on a gas stove, washed our clothes in a gas boiler, washed ourselves using the gas heater, and not to mention the very strange drying device I described to you before. But it was no good arguing with the young woman, because she did not have a card in her filing system for the house I was talking about. Therefore, they did not provide gas to that house. Therefore, I had no bill to pay. I didn't argue. I gave her my forwarding address. And since all of this happened pretty nearly 60 years ago, I do hope that no one is ever going to decide that that was a mistake. I can only assume that the bills were being delivered to the part of the house that had long since been closed off and to which we had no access. So, even keel. But things were not going to stay like that for very long. Why? Because I went back to work. I didn't seek to go back to work, you understand. I wasn't looking for a job, and the idea of maternity leave from working in a school didn't exist in the years that I'm talking about. But I did one evening go with a group of my friends to one of the socials that often occurred for the community. And during the course of the evening, I happened to be dancing with a chap called John, who was the local jeweller. And he and his wife Vi, and my husband and I, had become good friends. He was saying that he was not looking forward to Monday. This was Saturday evening. Why not? Because his shop assistant had resigned, because she and her husband were moving south. He was going to a different job. And his apprentice had just gone into hospital with appendicitis. So that on Monday, John would have the shop all to himself, no shop assistant, no apprentice, and he didn't know how he would manage. I replied, just casually, "Oh, well, if I didn't have a small baby to look after, I'd come and rescue you if you would have me," and thought no more of it. The next day, Sunday, we had a visit from John and his wife Vi, and they had come to say they would like to take up my offer of helping in the shop in the emergency, and that Vi had agreed, I hope she agreed happily, that she would look after my son because she already had 2 small children, and in her own words she said to add an extra one when you've already got 2 really wasn't going to be a problem. Well, if that's what she believed, good for her. So it was decided that I would, for a short while, in the emergency, go each day to the jeweller's shop for 1 o'clock so that John could have some lunch, and then I would continue to work there until about 5:30, 6 o'clock, when the shop closed. The scheme worked. It worked rather well, because the emergency lasted for 2 years. I continued to work at John's jeweller's shop until we left Thurso. I had ventured into the retail business twice before. On both occasions, I hadn't decided that I wanted to do the job permanently. For a little while, in one of my university holidays, I had worked in a greengrocer's on the main street of Maidstone High Street, and the shop had an open front and a roller shutter that pushed up in the mornings and came right down at night, so the shop was like having a market stall, but in the middle of a busy high street. One Saturday afternoon, when things got a bit frantic, I realised that I wasn't entirely coping when I called out to a friend as I put eggs into the big pan on the weighing machine, "How much are eggs a pound?" I was teased unmercifully for that thereafter, and decided that greengrocery and me, even though greengrocery doesn't normally include eggs, were not a good combination. The other job that I had was in Boyd's Electrical, and I worked there for several weeks in the period between leaving the university and starting in my first teaching post. If I had had any intention of going into the retail business, I could have done so. When I had been at Boyd's for just a fortnight, I was made assistant manager. But any ambitions that I might have had, and I didn't have any, of staying in that trade completely vanished out of the window because of background music. In those days, one could try out a record before you bought it, and several weeks of Johnny Remember Me over and over and over and over again made it quite clear to me that I didn't want to work anywhere near recorded music. I envisaged that working in a jeweller's shop would be calm and elegant, and for a lot of the time it was. Sometimes, especially in the mornings, it was almost too calm. When it was calm, my job was to prepare and send out accounts, because besides selling things, the shop did lots of watch repairs and clock repairs. That wasn't the easiest job in the world, not because of my mathematics, but because conversations like this occurred. I would say, "John, you haven't given me any information about how much Miss Thing's repair is going to cost for her watch." And John would say, "Oh, she's the midwife. You canna charge her for her watch." Or, on one occasion, "John, I haven't had any invoice information for Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so for their clock repair." And he would say, "Ah, they gave me a sack of potatoes last year before the winter." And then the most mysterious one of all, opposite the jeweller shop was the big electricity showrooms in the town. In the window there were a couple of magnificent chest freezers. And every year John's job would be to service all the clocks in the showrooms. That would include the time clocks which switched on and off, the lighting in the windows so that they were illuminated after the shop was closed but went off at dark, etc., etc. And I had never ever seen a bill for this service. And when trying to prepare one, I discovered that John's hobby in life, when he wasn't being a jeweller, was that he was a trout and salmon fisher. And where did his catch get stored? In the said chest freezers in the hydroelectric board shop window. Near Christmas, however, working in the shop was just frantic. And I particularly remember one afternoon when I put a kettle on to boil in the little back office so that we could have a cup of tea when things quietened down. And things didn't quieten down. There were person after person after person all buying Christmas presenty things. And suddenly there was the most dreadful smell. And I went out to see what was happening. And it was that all the water in the little kettle had boiled dry, and when I went to attempt to take the kettle off the stove, the bottom fell out of it completely. I must have been well regarded by my boss, because he decided after some while that he and Vi would take a holiday. They would go away for a week and leave me in charge. I was very proud of this responsibility and assured them that it would be fine. Well, I went into work on Monday morning, and it was fine for about half an hour. James, the apprentice that had had appendicitis, of course had fully recovered, and was working in the back shop. And at about 9:30, he came bursting in to the room where all the sales occurred, saying, Jeanie, the shop's on fire, the shop's on fire. And I said in my best English voice, Oh, James, don't exaggerate. Went into the back office, and indeed the room and the workroom was full of black smoke. There was, of course, no one in the flat upstairs, which is where the family and my son would have been normally, so we shut the doors so that the smoke didn't go up to the flat upstairs. I sent James out to the front door of the shop to make sure he didn't let any customers come in, and I managed to find my way through the smoke to the little office where the phone was to ring for the fire brigade. The fire brigade came remarkably quickly, which is surprising because in a town like Thurso, most of the firemen were volunteers, and they had to drop whatever their normal day job was in order to come and gather to be firemen. I sometimes wondered what would happen if the firemen and the lifeboatmen were required at one and the same time, because I'm pretty sure they were pretty much the same blokes. The biggest decision that I ever had to make about that fire was whether to tell Vi and John what had happened before they came back at the end of the week. Fortunately, I decided not to tell them. You will understand this was before we all had mobile phones, and contacting them wasn't going to be easy anyway. And when they came back, no damage had been done to the structure of the building. To this day, I am sure that James was probably smoking while cleaning watch parts in a tray of cleaning fluid. He always insisted that he was not, and no one could ever really find out. The biggest problem was insurance. Everything the shop owned was insured straightforwardly. All of other customers' goods in for repair had to be sorted out between being insured by the shop if there was no other insurance and being insured by the owners if they had their owner's insurance. It took forever. But we did have a very smart, newly painted shop at the end of it all, and I forgave James and John forgave me. And the best thing of all was my little boy grew up not as an only child, but with the rough and tumble of two surrogate siblings. Bye-bye.